America didn't misjudge Canada in 2025. It underestimated it. For decades, Washington treated Canada as a background constant, a polite, predictable neighbor that complained quietly, negotiated patiently, and ultimately absorbed whatever pressure the United States applied. Tariffs came and went. Trade disputes flared and cooled. The assumption never changed. Canada would grumble, then comply. That assumption collapsed, not with speeches, not with threats, not with military posturing, but with something Washington has never learned how to control: consumer withdrawal. When Donald Trump reignited tariffs and slapped a 25% penalty on Canadian goods, the expectation inside the U.S. political system was automatic. Canada would object, Ottawa would seek talks, industry would absorb the shock, and the United States would move on, unchanged. Instead, Canadians changed the rules. They didn't protest in the streets, they didn't flood embassies, they didn't wait for government instructions. They stopped buying American products, quietly, deliberately, and at scale. This wasn't emotional outrage that burns hot and disappears. This was discipline. Millions of Canadians made the same decision at checkout counters, liquor stores, booking websites, and grocery aisles. They closed their wallets, not for a day or a week, but month after month. And Washington had no playbook for that. Liquor stores across Canada didn't make symbolic gestures. Provinces pulled millions of dollars worth of American wine and spirits from shelves almost overnight. Entire categories of U.S. alcohol vanished. Supply chains froze, exporters were left staring at inventory they could no longer move. This wasn't activism. It was market denial. American brands lost access to one of their most reliable export destinations, and there was nothing Washington could do to reverse it. No executive order forces people to buy bourbon. No press conference convinces consumers to change their habits back. The movement had a name: elbows up, a hockey phrase turned into a political signal, a warning that Canada would no longer absorb economic punishment quietly. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't branded by politicians. It spread organically, through culture and habit. And that's what made it dangerous. Governments can be negotiated with. Consumers cannot. Once trust is gone, participation disappears. By mid-2025, the United States started feeling consequences it could no longer dismiss. American industries began reporting sharp drops, not just in sales, but in access. Markets they assumed were permanent suddenly weren't. The most unsettling part wasn't the losses themselves. It was the realization that Canada didn't need permission to do this. Ottawa didn't announce sanctions. It didn't threaten retaliation. It didn't escalate diplomatically. It simply allowed Canadians to act. And Canadians did. Travel patterns shifted. Weekend trips across the border no longer felt harmless. Vacations that once defaulted to Florida or Arizona were rerouted or canceled. Streaming subscriptions were dropped. Small routine purchases became political decisions. And none of this could be undone with negotiations. Because this pressure wasn't coming from government. It was coming from below. Washington publicly dismissed the boycotts as noise, as temporary anger, as symbolic. But behind closed doors, industries were already alarmed. Because when consumers disengage, recovery is slow and sometimes impossible. Canada didn't shout. It didn't threaten. It didn't escalate. It withdrew. And for the first time in years, the United States realized something uncomfortable. Economic power only works when participation is assumed. In 2025, Canada stopped assuming. The numbers confirmed what Washington tried to downplay. American spirits exports began collapsing in 2025. Overall exports fell sharply, but the damage wasn't evenly spread. Canada was the epicenter. Exports of U.S. spirits to Canada fell by 85% in a single quarter. 85%. That isn't a fluctuation. That isn't market noise. That's a market being cut off. Bourbon shipments to Canada dropped roughly 60% within months. Rum exports nearly halved. Vodka, gin, brandy, all followed the same downward trajectory. Industry groups admitted the timing couldn't have been worse. Domestic U.S. spirit sales were stagnating. Warehouses were filling up. International markets were no longer optional. They were survival. Canada knew this vulnerability existed and closed the door anyway. Alcohol was only the opening signal. Tourism delivered the deeper shock. Canadians have long been the backbone of U.S. international tourism. Nearly 1/3 of all foreign visitors came from Canada. Border towns, hotels, outlet malls, ski resorts, entire regional economies were engineered around predictable Canadian traffic. In 2025, that traffic thinned dramatically. Air travel from Canada to the United States fell nearly 20% compared to the year before. Car travel dropped almost 30%, producing month after month of continued decline. 11 consecutive months. This wasn't seasonal. It wasn't economic uncertainty. It was intentional avoidance. Canadians weren't afraid to travel. They were choosing not to. The U.S. Travel Association projected a $5.7 billion loss in international tourism spending for the year, largely driven by declining Canadian visitors. Border businesses felt it immediately. Hotels lost bookings. Restaurants cut hours. Retail corridors near the border went quiet. At that point, denial collapsed. A congressional report warned that falling Canadian tourism was actively damaging American businesses and putting jobs at risk. Border states were bleeding. The tone was unusually blunt because the losses were no longer theoretical. And then Canada delivered the most humiliating blow of all. Orange juice, not steel, not oil, not automobiles, orange juice. Canada deliberately targeted Florida, Donald Trump's political heartland, and hit fresh orange juice imports with counter tariffs. When those tariffs took effect, shipments collapsed almost immediately. By early summer, U.S. orange juice exports to Canada had fallen to their lowest level in more than 20 years. That wasn't coincidence. That was precision. Even after Canada lifted most counter tariffs, orange juice imports remained more than 50% below previous levels. Canadian businesses stopped serving it. Consumers avoided it. Retailers reconsidered whether stocking American products was worth the backlash. Florida citrus sales declined. Prices rose while volumes fell. Trade publications quietly acknowledged the damage because there was no narrative that made this look temporary. This wasn't economic theory anymore. It was consequence. And here's what Washington still struggles to accept. Canada didn't escalate diplomatically. It didn't threaten militarily. It didn't posture rhetorically. It bypassed the entire American political system. It proved something deeply unsettling. That power doesn't always sit in governments. Sometimes it sits in ordinary people. In 2025, Canada turned everyday purchasing decisions into a form of foreign policy, not announced, not centralized, but devastatingly effective. The United States couldn't sanction it. It couldn't intimidate it. It couldn't negotiate with it, and that shattered a long-held belief. The belief that Canada would always absorb the hit, that it would never respond in a way that directly hurt American businesses. That economic pressure only flows one way. Those beliefs died quietly, and Washington knows it. Not because Canada shouted, not because Ottawa threatened, but because money stopped moving. And once money stops moving, even the most powerful country in the world is forced to listen.